There are things that we experience that we can't explain in words. Not everyone will believe it, and honestly, I doubted it for a long time too. But there is a kind of darkness that doesn't come from the night, and there is a kind of light that can pierce through any darkness. What am I going to tell you? Never been told anywhere with this truth. I only ask you one thing: stay until the end, because you're about to be witness one of the most incredible, disturbing, and liberating experiences you've ever heard of in your life. This is not a movie. This is real, and it happened to me. My name is Joshua Williams. I was born in a quiet little town, the kind that looks like it was taken from an old movie, called Abilene, Texas. Abilene was the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked, where the neighbor brought apple pie on Sunday and everyone knew everyone on a first-name basis. But my home was a world apart. It was far from the city, isolated in a clearing surrounded by tall trees that seemed to want to hide something. There was no children's laughter, nor the sound of a television on. The silence there was almost sacred, but it carried an invisible weight. It was a silence that seemed to observe. My father, David Williams, was a man of few words. He worked as a carpenter and restored antique furniture, and people respected him as if he had some ancient wisdom. He spoke with authority, but without shouting. His look was enough to impose fear or respect. Many in the city said he had a spiritual gift, and sometimes sought him out in secret for advice, prayers, or strange rituals they called a blessing of protection. I was just a kid, but I noticed something out of the ordinary. My father wasn't just feared, he was revered, and that scared me more than it impressed me. The strangest thing is that, even though he was seen as a man of faith, he never set foot in churches. When asked, he said that real temples don't have walls. I saw how people agreed with him, with an uncomfortable smile, as if they wanted to appear open but were avoiding asking questions that might reveal something dangerous. At home, he kept a locked room, a room no one could enter. Once, I caught my mother cleaning the door handle with salt and whispering words in Latin. When she saw me, she simply said, "Go play, Joshua." But his expression said it all. She was scared. Fear of the house. Scared of him. Fear of something that even I didn't understand yet. My mother was a sweet woman, but always tense. He seemed to live in a state of alert. It was as if he smiled only with his lips, never with his eyes. I baked cakes, tended the garden, read the Bible in a low voice, but I never questioned my father's decisions. She didn't talk much, and when she did, the words came like someone walking on broken glass. I heard her crying at night, but when I went into the room, she said it was allergies. I knew it wasn't. And the most curious thing is that despite all this tension, she lit candles at home always at the same time. Some were white, others black, and once, just once, I saw her draw a strange symbol on the floor with charcoal. She quickly deleted it when she realized I was looking. "This is to protect the house," he said. "But protect from what?" While other children played in the park, I spent my days among silent hallways where the walls seemed to watch. There was always the smell of incense, sometimes sweet like vanilla, sometimes strong like sulfur. Once I found a rag doll tied with red string inside a wooden box, buried at the back of the house. When I took it to my mother, she screamed like never before, "Joshua, bury it again, and don't ever touch that again." I froze. That was just a doll, right? But there was something about her that gave me goosebumps, as if it were not just an object, but a warning, a limit, a secret. Over time, I began to realize that my father was not just someone respected for his spirituality. He was feared. Some people came to our house at night, always in black cars with the headlights off. I looked out the window. They would come in, stay for hours, and leave without saying a word. One night, I saw one of these people kneeling in front of my father, holding a lit candle. There was no prayer, no praise, just silence and a dark kind of reverence, as if they were standing before something sacred, but not the kind you find in a church. That would leave a deep impression on me, and I still didn't know to how much. At school, I was the weird kid, shy, always with dark circles under his eyes, always silent. When classmates talked about superheroes or sports, I thought of symbols I saw in secret books, of voices that echoed at night, of eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. I felt different, not in a good way, as if there was something inside me that I didn't choose to carry, something inherited, something old, and no matter how much I tried to live, like an ordinary boy, the shadows of my home followed me. and I knew that sooner or later they would come and exact a price. Even as a child, I felt that my story was not just mine, that I was inside something bigger, something old, something no one dared say out loud. And as much as I tried to ignore it, there was a silent truth hanging over our family. We were different, and it wasn't for blessing. It was for something much darker. Nobody chooses where they are born, but some of us are. Born into territories of spiritual warfare, and don't even know it until it's too late. Childhood should be about dreams, toys, and hugs. Mine was marked by silence, secrets, and shadows. If something inside you felt that this story is not just a story, but a calling, then this message is for you. Subscribe to the channel now, because here you won't hear ordinary stories. You will live experiences that defy logic, break the silence, and reveal the invisible. Each testimony here is a cry for freedom, a spiritual wake-up call, and perhaps the answer you've been searching for years. What comes next goes beyond pain. It goes beyond fear. You will see what happens when the spiritual world becomes physical, when the invisible reveals itself, and when the name of Jesus enters territory that hell thought was its own. Stay on the channel, because in the next chapter, you will witness what no one has had the courage to tell you until today. Are you prepared to see what is behind? What they call spiritual protection. Since I was 5 years old, my reality began to distort. While other children received toys or watched cartoons, I received symbols drawn on the floor with black salt and animal blood. My father would take me to an old barn at the back of the property. Inside, the air was heavy, with the smell of mold and sulfur mixed together, and the walls were covered in black cloth and drawings that, for years, haunted my dreams. I was placed in the center of a circle, formed with animal bones and red candles. He said, "Stay still, don't say anything," and I obeyed, because even his silence was already a threat. But what came next would mark me forever. The voices began to emerge slowly. Some came from people in dark robes. Others seemed like whispers that appeared out of nowhere. The words weren't English. They sounded like mixtures of Latin, Hebrew, and something guttural that I never understood. Once, a masked woman placed her hand on my head and began to tremble as she spoke a kind of inverted prayer. I felt like my skin was being pulled from the inside. I didn't know what spiritual consecration meant, but my body reacted as if it were being offered, as if something invisible was marking me. And the worst thing is that this was just the beginning of what would become my childhood. As time went by, my father began to teach me to repeat certain phrases during rituals. Words, he said, attracted the eyes of the ancestral spirit. He gave me objects to hold, stones with carved symbols, silver daggers, and even small figurines with red eyes. I didn't understand what it all meant, but every time I messed up my words or hesitated to follow what I was told, he looked at me with a kind of disappointment that crushed me inside. I just wanted to be loved, but in that environment, love didn't exist, just obedience. And with each ritual, I lost more pieces of my identity. One night, I remember my father told me to put off the flesh. Those words chilled me. I stood there, not understanding. Then he ordered me to kneel in the center of the circle and began to paint marks on my body with a dark, sticky liquid. "You need to be accepted by the guardian spirit," he said. Behind him, other people were singing. Some were crying, others were laughing uncontrollably, and I, at 5 years old, just wanted everything to stop. But each tear of mine seemed to fuel even more what they called strength, and I started to wonder if it would ever end. Over time, I began to have lapses of consciousness during rituals. He remembered going into the barn, but he couldn't remember going out. There were flashes of lights, screams, and the sensation of something entering my chest. My mother, who was watching from afar, looked empty. It was as if she wasn't there anymore, as if she were just a body obeying. And I no longer knew where the nightmare began and where reality ended, until one day I saw something that would change everything. But this is a part you need to listen to carefully. Children are sponges. They absorb everything: love, pain, faith, or destruction. And when a home, which should be a refuge, becomes an altar of horrors, the soul begins to break into 1,000 pieces. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt fear in your own home or witnessed something that you still carry in your chest today? Share your experience. Other people here may be experiencing what you experienced. Let's create a space to have truth and healing, and continue here because in the next chapter you will understand what happens when fear stops being psychological and starts to manifest itself in the flesh. Nights were the worst times, when the sun hid behind the trees and the wind began to blow through the cracks in the roof. I knew there would be no rest. Fear took over my body before I even went to bed. The darkness in my room wasn't just the absence of light. It was presence, a constant, heavy, suffocating presence. I slept with the blanket up to the top of my head, believing it would protect me, but still I felt it. I felt like someone was watching me, as if something approached my face, very close, almost touching, but invisible. And then the nightmares started. But I wasn't always asleep. It was always the same pattern. I felt my body stuck, paralyzed, as if I was sinking into the mattress. I saw figures passing through the walls. I heard voices whispering words that seemed to come from a distant place, and yet inside my ear. Some nights I felt cold hands tugging at my foot, and I swear to all that is holy, I once woke up with my body on the floor, away from the bed. I tried to tell my mother. I tried to tell you what happened. She looked at me as if she heard me but wasn't really there. He just repeated, "It's just a dream, Joshua. Go to sleep." But I knew it wasn't a dream. It was something real, something spiritual. My mother was a mystery in her own right. There were days when she hugged me tenderly, as if there was still a protective instinct within her. But there were other days when she would simply look at me without blinking, as if in a trance. I even doubted whether she knew who I was. She cooked, cleaned, did everything automatically like a programmed doll. Once, in the early hours of the morning, I got up to drink water and saw her sitting in the living room with candles lit around her and her eyes fixed on a wall. She was murmuring something I couldn't understand. When he saw me, he smiled, but it was a strange, empty smile. It was there that I realized my mother was also a prisoner, and maybe I was being controlled by the same forces that terrified me. The voices I heard at night began to follow me during the day. Sometimes in the middle of a class, I would hear my name being whispered, and no one around me would notice. Other times, I saw figures in the corner of the room, as if they were dark spots vibrating in the air. At school, I was the quiet, withdrawn student that no one wanted as a partner. Not out of malice, but because I looked charged, dark, strange. My drawings were always in black and red, with eyes, symbols, and figures that I didn't know where they came from. The teacher once called my mother to talk, and after that, she never spoke to me again. It seems that even adults were afraid of knowing too much. While the children talked about games, heroes, or trips with their parents, I avoided any conversation. I didn't know how to explain that my biggest concern wasn't the report card. It was surviving another night. I learned to laugh at the right moment, to pretend normality. But inside, everything was confusion. I grew up with the certainty that there was something inside me that wasn't mine, a kind of constant oppression, like my soul was being fought for and no one around me could help me. And the most devastating thing was feeling that God seemed so far away from that place. Many children smile on the outside but are screaming on the inside. Hell does not choose age to attack, but silence. That could be the cruelest prison of all. And now, I want to hear from you. If you've ever had nightmares that seemed real, voices that no one else heard, or presences that paralyzed you and share, this can help someone understand that they are not crazy. You are fighting an invisible battle. Hashtag Torcida por Joshua. If you believe he will get out of this, comment on this. Hashtag, let's create a chain of spiritual support here in the comments. And prepare your heart, because in the next chapter, Joshua won't just be a spectator. He will be thrown into the center of something that not even adults could bear. A ritual that requires blood. That morning, there was something different in the air. The silence, which was already normal in our house, seemed even thicker, as if even the birds had been instructed to be silent. My father appeared at my bedroom door in a black robe. It wasn't costume, it wasn't theater. It was real. He told me to put on some dark red clothes that were already folded on the bed. He didn't ask questions, didn't explain. I just said, "Today you will be accepted." I didn't know what that meant, but something in the tone of his voice made me understand that my childhood ended there, and that from that moment on, I would become the property of something I didn't even know. The walk to the barn seemed longer than usual. I walked with short steps, like someone walking to the slaughterhouse, but without yet knowing what was going to die inside me. When we entered, the environment was transformed. The windows had been covered with black cloths. The floor was painted with circular symbols and spirals made with ash. Black candles burned at the edges of the space, casting dancing shadows that seemed to have a life of their own. The smell was a mixture of oxidized iron, mold, and raw meat. That's when I realized there was fresh blood scattered in several spots on the floor. My father took me to the center of the circle and told me to stand with my eyes closed. Around them, 6 people in black robes began to chant in ancient languages, mixing distorted psalms with guttural sounds. It was as if it were a hybrid ritual, a parody of the sacred. One of the voices began to scream louder, as if it were being possessed, and another began to laugh, but it was a dry laugh, without joy, as if it was mocking everything. That was pure. I felt my skin crawl and the air grew colder by the second, and then everything went silent. And it was in that silence that something appeared. I felt as if the space around me had folded. The air became heavier, my breathing stopped, and my heart began to beat so hard that it seemed to want to come out of my chest. Something, I don't know what, passed behind me. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't feel any wind, but I knew I was no longer alone there. The adults around me began saying phrases like, "Accept the blood, accept the vessel, may the lineage be maintained." My father placed his hand on my head and whispered something in my ear, a sequence of words that seemed to open a door inside me. And when he finished, a force invaded me violently. I fell to my knees, my arms tingling and my vision blurred. It was as if there was another consciousness fighting inside me. I didn't scream, but inside, I was begging for help. A part of me wanted to run, but my body didn't respond. I stood there shaking as I saw eyes, yes eyes, appear on the barn walls. They blinked slowly as if analyzing me, and then, like an invisible blade, I felt pain pierce my chest. There was no visible blood, but it was as if a mark had been made on my soul. And at that exact moment, I knew something had entered me, something that wouldn't come easy. There are experiences that have no language. Only those who have gone through something similar understand what it's like to feel like your essence has been violated. A child's childhood should be protected, not offered. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a place where you felt like evil was present, even if no one else noticed? Have you ever experienced a moment when something invisible touched you, and you were never the same again? Share in the comments. Your story can give courage to others who live in silence. Stick around, because in the next chapter, Joshua will start to lose control of his own mind, voices, outbursts, hate, and the slow destruction of everything he was. Are you ready to find out what happens when evil takes root inside? After that night in the barn, something inside me broke. It wasn't visible to the eye, but I knew it wasn't the same anymore. I started hearing voices, not bad thoughts, but real voices. They would appear in the middle of the night, whispering my name, cursing me, accusing me. Sometimes they would say, "You are ours." Other times they laughed, and it was the most disturbing sound I've ever heard. I tried to ignore it. I put pillows over my ears, slept with the light on, but nothing stopped me. The voices knew where to find me, and worse, they started following me during the day too. At school, I sat in the back of the room with my hood over my head, avoiding any eye contact. But inside me, the turmoil was constant. I felt angry at everything and everyone. Any word crossed was like a knife. I even punched a colleague because he looked at me for 3 seconds too long. At home, my tantrums even scared my mother, who was almost emotionally absent. I punched the wall, ripped my clothes, broke objects. I didn't understand where so much hate came from, but it was as if it was growing inside me, fueled by the darkness that had been planted years before, and the feeling of losing control was more terrifying than any nightmare. I started having bouts of panic. Sometimes my body would lock up and I would feel like I was being suffocated by invisible hands. Other times my heart was racing, my hands were shaking, and everything around me felt distorted, like I was between two worlds. At 14, I had my first breakdown. I sat in the school bathroom for over an hour, listening to a voice telling me to cut myself. It was there that I started using a blade hidden in my backpack. It wasn't because I wanted to die, it was because I wanted to silence the voices. The cut provided relief. It was physical pain, to drown out the invisible pain. And this became an addiction that no one saw because I learned to hide it well. At 15, I attempted suicide twice. The first was a handful of pills stolen from the kitchen cupboard. The second was with an improvised rope in the school shed. Both times I was interrupted by chance, or perhaps by miracle, But inside me, something screamed, "You're already dead inside." I started drinking in secret. I found old bottles that my father used in rituals and drank in the early hours of the morning. Then came the cigarettes, then marijuana, then anything that would make me forget myself. I became a zombie in a school uniform, and no one asked anything because I had become invisible to the world. I started to believe I was crazy, that my mind had collapsed, that God hated me, that I was a mistake. I remember one night when, lying on the floor of my room, I looked up at the ceiling and said out loud, "If there is a God, why did the Lord create me like this?" No response came. No light appeared, just the same silence that had always accompanied me. And it was in this silence that I accepted the most dangerous lie, that I was worthless. Hell does not begin after death. For many, it begins in life, in isolation, in unresolved trauma, in pain that no one notices. The problem is that when the world ignores, evil takes advantage. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment when you thought you were going crazy? Have you ever felt like no one really sees what's going on inside you? If you've ever struggled with destructive thoughts, addictions, or crises that no one understood, share. Here you don't need to hide. Your story could be a key to freeing others. And don't leave here, because something is going to happen that defies all logic. Someone, unlikely, will show up, and with it, the first spark of light will begin to shine amidst the chaos. I didn't expect anything different to happen that week. My days were always the same, getting up, without wanting to, walking through the school corridors like a living shadow, avoiding eye contact and counting the minutes until I got back to my room, where I sank a little more into emptiness. But that Tuesday, everything changed, and not with noise. It was with presence. Sarah appeared in the room looking like she was in no hurry. She had a calm, almost disconcerting manner. While everyone tried to fit in with shouts and forced smiles, she just sat and watched. It was as if she saw everything, but didn't judge anything. And when our eyes met for the first time, I felt an uneasiness that I couldn't explain. Over the next few days, Sarah started talking to me. Nothing invasive. She spoke like someone who already knew I would reject it, but still insisted. He asked me what I liked to draw, if I had read certain books, and once, out of nowhere, he handed me a piece of paper with a handwritten verse. Isaiah 41:10, "Fear not, for I am with you." I didn't even read it. To the end, anger invaded me like a punch to the stomach. I tore the paper in front of her. I wanted her to disappear. I wanted her to stop. But for some reason, part of me felt embarrassed afterwards. It was as if something in me recognized something in her that I had lost a long time ago. Sarah was different. While everyone talked about themselves, she listened. While others mocked my appearance, she looked on with compassion. Not that pious, distant compassion, but one that made you feel seen, even without saying a word. And the strangest thing is that sometimes I noticed her looking at me from afar, with her eyes closed and her lips moving silently. It didn't take long for me to realize she was praying for me, and that disconcerted me. It made me furious, but at the same time, it was the only thing that seemed to touch something I believed was dead. The name of Jesus coming out of her mouth caused me physical pain. It was like my body was burning from the inside. I don't know how to explain it. It seemed like something inside me rejected that name with hatred. But every time she said, "Jesus loves you," even when I scoffed, I felt a warmth in my chest, a discomfort, a conflict, as if there was a war between two voices. One said, "Stay away, she wants to deceive you." The other whispered, "Stay, listen, there's something here you've never known." And that whisper, it was the first sound of hope I'd heard in years. Sarah didn't give up, even when I ignored her, even when I made offensive jokes or threw the flyers she left in my wallet in the trash. She smiled tenderly, never sorry. And one day, for no reason at all, she said to me, "Joshua, I didn't come here by chance. I know you feel like you're carrying something heavy, but God can set you free. He has already started." At that moment, my legs shook because I hadn't told her anything, but she knew, and that terrified me and attracted me at the same time. God doesn't need screams to enter someone. Sometimes he uses the silence of someone who prays in secret, and when a prayer is said with faith and truth, even the darkness trembles. Now tell me honestly, have you ever come across someone who seemed to be light in a place where everything was darkness? Have you ever felt angry at hearing the name of God, and at the same time, a part of you wanted to surrender? Comment with the hashtag because someone prayed for me. If there was ever a Sarah in your life, someone who saw you beyond your pain and prayed even when you rejected her, stay with me, because in the next chapter, what was spiritual will manifest itself in a supernatural way. You will see what happens when the light of Jesus touches a territory that hell had already marked as its own. Are you prepared to witness the beginning of spiritual warfare? Sarah invited me to a youth group at a church in Dallas. I hesitated. I didn't want to go. Something inside me resisted strongly, as if a spiritual alarm was screaming inside my chest. But there was something about her, that peace in her eyes, that firmness that wasn't arrogant but carried authority, that embarrassed me. So I accepted. Deep down, part of me wanted to prove that this was just another nonsense, that God didn't exist, or if he did, he certainly didn't care about me. But the other part, I was too tired to continue fighting alone. And it was like that, divided inside, that I entered a place that would change everything. The church was on a simple street, without an eye-catching sign. From the outside, it looked ordinary. But when I walked in, I felt something different. I don't know if it was the sound of young people talking, if it was the smell of fresh coffee and cake, or if it was the soft music coming from a speaker in the corner. But for the first time in years, my mind went silent. Not completely. The voices were still there, whispering, but they were further away, as if something was blocking it. Sarah introduced me to the group as my friend Joshua, and everyone smiled like I was welcome. But I didn't trust them. I felt that if they knew who I really was, they would back off, but they didn't back down. They got even closer. The service began with music. I sat in the back, arms crossed, trying to maintain a pose of indifference, but the lyrics of the songs moved me. You are holy, you are worthy, Jesus is Lord. Each sentence was like an arrow in my chest. I started to break out in a cold sweat. My hands were shaking. I tried to get up to leave, but my legs gave out. That was when suddenly the group declared in unison, Jesus is the Lord of this place. At that moment, I screamed. A scream that wasn't mine. It came from inside me, but it didn't feel human. My eyes burned like fire. My body began to shake violently, and before I could understand what was happening, I passed out. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor of the church, with a group of young people around, praying with their eyes closed, some in strange languages, others declaring verses in a firm voice. A pastor had his hand on my head and said, "He is the Lord's. All the legalities of hell are broken." I wanted to scream again. I wanted to run away, but something held me back, something bigger than me. For the first time in my life, someone was fighting for me, and I didn't have to do anything, just listen. And what I heard that night was the sound of chains being broken in the unseen. They prayed for hours. I cried without knowing why. I felt physical pain, as if something was being ripped out of me, and maybe they were. The weight I carried was not just emotional, it was spiritual. As the young people cried out, I saw images passing before my eyes, figures, symbols, bloods, and then light, a strong light that blinded me inside. And at that moment, the spiritual war for my life truly began. It is no exaggeration to say that there are places where hell retreats, and sometimes all a wounded soul needs is to be taken there by someone who won't give up. Now I want to hear from you. If you have ever witnessed spiritual liberation or seen someone react to the name of Jesus with pain or resistance, share here. Someone may be living this right now, and don't miss what comes next, because in the next chapter, you will witness the exact moment when Jesus enters the room and all hell is confronted. Liberation is close, but the confrontation will be even more intense. In the weeks following that service, something in me began to change. It didn't happen overnight. It was like peeling off layers of dead skin, one by one. The pastor guided me to fast, to pray, even though I didn't yet know how to do it, and to immerse myself in the Word of God. Sarah gave me a Bible marked with post-its and her notes. "Start with John," she said. "Read slowly." And I obeyed. Each verse seemed to have been written for me. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. That hit me like a punch. It was as if God had already seen me, long before I recognized that I needed him. But the actual liberation was not pretty. It was intense. During the early hours of the morning, voices would return, trying to intimidate me. I dreamed of red eyes watching me from the corner of the room. Once I felt like someone was sitting on my chest and starting to suffocate me, but all I could say was, "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus." And the pressure, disappeared. I began to understand. The name had power, a power that I had never known and that seemed to enrage everything that previously dominated me. It was then that I realized the war was still on, but this time I was no longer alone. During the fast, my body weakened, but my soul seemed to awaken. I began to have spiritual insights. I saw clearly what was evil, what was deceit, and what was pure. I began to dream of heavenly things. There was a day when I saw a golden staircase going up to heaven. The other day I dreamed that I was lying in a field and someone was putting a white cloak over me. The marks of the pacts, of the traumas, still hurt, but something bigger was covering me. And it was as if, even without understanding everything, I was already being restored inside. That particular night, everything changed. I was alone in my room, kneeling, with the Bible open to Psalm 34. This man cried out in distress, and the Lord heard him and delivered him out of all his troubles. I started to cry, not out of sadness, but out of relief. It was as if something was cleansing me, washing every cell of my soul. So I closed my eyes and I saw Jesus entering the room. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me. And in his gaze, yes, there was truth, authority, but also compassion. And then he reached out, touched the center of my chest, and said, "I have never abandoned you. You are mine." At that moment, I felt as if an invisible current snapped inside me. It was as if everything that held me back, the voices, the pacts, the darkness, had lost its hold on me. I fell to the ground and cried like a lost child who was finally found. For the first time in my entire life, the room was silent, but a peaceful silence, a healing silence, a silence of beginning again. That night, I was completely freed, and hell lost. True liberation is not noisy. Sometimes she comes with a presence that invades without forcing, touches without hurting, and breaks chains without making a fuss. When Jesus enters, the darkness does not argue, they retreat. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment where you felt like God met you in the midst of chaos? Have you ever experienced a spiritual touch that changed everything, even without words? Comment with the hashtag #HeFoundMe if you have ever had an experience where the presence of Jesus became real in your room, in your silence, or in the midst of your despair. If you haven't experienced this yet but believe you can, write, "He sounds, I want this touch," because the same God who entered Joshua's room can enter yours too. Stay here, because in the next chapter, Joshua begins a new mission, to tell what hell tried to hide. You will hear spiritual secrets that many are afraid to expose. Are you ready to hear truths that the world avoids? Today, when I look at my life, I can hardly believe where God brought me from. If you saw who I was, that teenager filled with voices, anger, self-harm, and spiritual pacts, you would never have imagined that I would be here saying these words. But Jesus didn't just set me free, He rebuilt me. Today, I am married to an incredible woman who prayed for me before she even met me. We have 2 children, and every time I look into their eyes, I remember that the curse has been broken, the lineage has been restored, and what was a legacy of darkness became a generation of light. I serve full-time in ministry, traveling to cities, churches, and even prisons, sharing my testimony. And every time someone comes to me after a service saying, "You told my story," I understand. This pain had a purpose. My suffering was not in vain. There are thousands of people living in the dark, thinking they are lost causes. People who grew up in the occult were marked by rituals, experienced spiritual abuse, and think there is no way to escape. But I'm here to say that there is. And the name of this exit is Jesus. I've been in front of young people who heard the same voices I heard. I have hugged desperate mothers who discovered that their children were involved in pacts. I have prayed for men who carried spiritual tattoos, marks of ancient consecration, and I have seen these people fall to their knees weeping, being set free in the power of the name of Christ. I saw demons scream. I saw oppression cease. I saw lives start over. And all of this because someone one day prayed for me, and now I am the one praying for them. I have spoken at events where religious leaders have said that this type of subject should not be discussed. But I speak, because it was exactly this silence that almost killed me. Hell operates in secret, but heaven acts in the light. Therefore, my mission today is to expose the works of darkness, not to glorify them, but to show that they do not have the final word. Hell may have begun to write its story, but Jesus is the one who decides how it ends. And if he rewrote mine, he can do the same to anyone. Whoever was freed from the abyss has the authority to shout from above that there is a way out. And when someone who has survived the darkness begins to speak, all hell shakes, because they know they have lost another prisoner. Now it's your turn to participate. Do you know someone who thinks they are already too lost to be rescued? Or maybe that someone is you. Comment with the hashtag #MomentFreedFromDarkness if you believe that no darkness is greater than the light of God. If you have gone through occult spiritual experiences or carry marks from past pacts, share here. Your testimony could be the answer for someone who is at rock bottom. Stay with me, because in the next and final chapter, Joshua leaves you a direct message, something that maybe is exactly what you needed to hear today. Are you ready to answer this call? If you've been watching this video so far, I want to tell you something that perhaps no one has ever truly told you. This is no coincidence. God is calling you. Maybe you clicked out of curiosity, maybe you stopped here by chance while scrolling through your feed, but in the spiritual world, nothing is by chance. There is a purpose behind every word you hear. There's a battle going on right now, and your soul is the prize. And today could be the beginning of your liberation. You may carry traumas that you never dared to tell anyone about, old wounds that still bleed inside. Maybe your pain doesn't come from rituals, like mine, but from words that destroyed you, abuse that scarred you, or voids that no one filled. Maybe you've learned to smile in public and collapse onto your pillow. I know what it's like. And most importantly, God also knows, and he never stopped seeing you. He can come into your room today just like he came into mine. It doesn't matter if the environment is charged, if your mind is agitated, or if your heart seems hard. He walks through walls. He goes through resistance. He breaks pacts with hell and rebuilds stories that seemed lost. All he needs is your permission, an opening, a simple prayer, something like, "Jesus, set me free." This phrase, however short it may seem, carries the power to change destinies. I've seen drug dealers surrender with it. I have seen former members of the occult shouting this name and being transformed. I've seen suicides let go of the rope and get up with hope. Why? Because when you give your name to Jesus, he writes a new identity over your old one. And maybe this is the exact moment this is happening to you. Don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe a relative, a child, a mother who prays in silence, or a friend who lives smiling on the outside and dying on the inside. Sometimes a shared link can be the seed of a miracle. And if this testimony touched your heart, like it, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Because here, every testimony is real, every pain is heard, and every story has a new beginning. And yours too could be the next one we tell here. Sometimes all heaven needs is a yes whispered in the dark. God sees what no one sees. He hears what no one else hears. And when he touches, no one remains the same. Now it's up to you. Do you believe that Jesus still enters rooms and changes destinies? That there is still liberation for those who many have already given up on? Now comment, "Jesus sets me free," not as a ritual, but as a cry of surrender. Like a key that opens the door for God to do what only he can. Don't leave yet, because in the next videos you will learn about stories that hell tried to erase, but that God transformed into living messages. And who knows, the next one will be yours. Would you allow your pain to become a cure for someone else?